Hello and welcome to the See Through podcast presented by Herman's Auctioneers. Today we're joined by David Herman, the Managing Director and Founder of Herman's Auction Rooms in Mines. Welcome, David.
Hi, David.
First question we have for you, David. Tell us about you, your background, where you're from, where did you go to school?
Probably the easiest way to go about this is to tell you the story of sort of how I wound up in this business, and the rest of it will fall into place.
Yeah.
At a very young age, I took a thing about collecting, about old castles, about stamps, coins, shells, whatever it was, and one thing led to the next, and the mother spotted this in me and thought there's something here, and she encouraged me. And like, for instance, I went from Nadia books to books on junior archaeology in one jump. So this thing came at me from all angles, right? Throw into that I have a family connection going back through my uncle, who was in the auctioneering business, but he was a very well-known fine art and furniture auctioneer in Dublin. So I have a family connection literally going back, you could say, 150 years in this game. I'm 62 years in it this year, and if you add that to previous things, so that all came together. And by the time I got to, say, about 14, I knew I was going to wind up in some shape, make or form in this business, right? I went to high school. I wasn't the most successful student that ever hit the place, to be quite honest with you. I was very, very good at history. I was very good at geography, all that sort of thing, because I was interested in it. And the rest of it, basically, I suppose, was a waste of time, to be quite honest with you. But that was the way it was, right? When I started in this game, it used to be an apprenticeship arrangement. It wasn't really, it was sort of a vague apprenticeship. You had to be 5 years in the business and over 21 to get your letters. So hence I thought, well, I'll leave school at 16, which is what I did. I'll do my 5 years and I'll get my letters, and after that by 21. That was all very well. I started originally in what was Sherry's auction rooms, and in those days the estate agents would have had an auction rooms attached. So if there was a probate case or something like that, you would sell the property, you would sell the contents. It was like a one-stop shop. We are now the only people left, as far as I know, that offer that service, that offer the complete service as it was back then. You had firms like Battersby's, Hamilton, Seln and Townsend. These were all well-known firms in the antique business, but they're mainly gone now. But they all would have been in the property end of things as well. Anyway, I left school at 16 and I started working in Sherry's auction rooms in Bagot Street. And in those days, you started on the floor. So you started as a porter, basically, and you were the junior porter. And in Sherry's, we had to wear bibs, and we all wore bibs, and I had to wear a blue bib, and I hated that blue bib because the head porter had a white bib. Yeah. I hated that blue bib. So it started. After about 2 years in there, the Auctioneers Association, as it then was, brought in the educational course in Rathmines. So old man Sherry came out and informed me I was going to college for 3 years, just like that, next Monday night. So I got a double dose because I got the apprenticeship and then I got the 3 years in Rathmines as well. And throw into that the fact that I'd been hanging around auction rooms and antiques shops and all the rest of it since I was a kid. And the whole thing came together. So by the time I got to 22, 23, I probably knew more than the average 35-year-old in this game. In fact, there was only really two of us, as far as I remember. They had to make the auctioneering course work, they had to get 30 students. Yeah. And they had got 20, they trawled the country and they got 27, and I was 28. And amongst that group was Ray Wilkinson, who subsequently went into business with. So Ray and I would both have been in the first year in that course. And as far as I know, we were probably the only two at the time that were specialising in the furniture end of the thing, as opposed to the property end. So as I said, by the time I got to sort of 23 or 24 or 25, so the trick was you went from being the porter to being the clerk. So I couldn't wait to be the clerk. I likewise couldn't wait to be the auctioneer. I didn't see the point of having to hang around. But anyway, eventually I got to be the clerk, and I clerked for all sorts of various characters. I remember one particular cattle auctioneer who had come across this antique sale, and he came into Allen and Townsend at the time with this particular sale. It was down in Kildare, and he was used to selling cattle on the hoofs, so he was busy selling chairs by the leg, which made it interesting thing at the end. And how many legs do you want, madam? It was an interesting twist on it.
Yeah.
In fact, that particular place, it was an old house. It had been an old family house, and the family had been there for a couple of 100 years. In those days, the local auctioneers, or the certain firms, Hamilton's, Allen and Townsend, they would have been the firms who did all the big country auctioneers. So I would have been I've been in there for the end of that, the likes of Glenastra Lodge, Wells House down in Gorey, and we had a huge 3-day auction down in that place. There would been quite a clatter of them that we would have gone just literally from house to house around the countryside. I remember when we did Glenastra Lodge down in Limerick. It was near Newcastle West, I think it was, and the boss did the auction the bank holiday weekend, and this is one for you now. And in return for working the bank holiday weekend, the staff were brought on a holiday the following weekend down to Kilkee. We were all put down and brought down to Kilkee for working the bank. It was a great time down there. There's actually the then boss, and I don't remember this, but apparently at some stage along the line, he had the family with him, and he had the 2 daughters who were young ones, and I got the job of having to babysit the 2 daughters because years later, somebody in the family had taken a cine shot of this thing.
All right.
But I'd forgotten that. It was a long time ago now. They're all gone now. We used to have so that was sort of the start of it. Sherry's auctions were on a Wednesday night. We used to have them every second Wednesday night, and you started at 7, and you had to be out of the place by 11 because at that stage you didn't have late night drinking, so the pubs effectively closed at 11:30. And of course, if there was an open door and all the drunks from the Waterloo House tried to come into the auction rooms, you couldn't get rid of them. So we had to be finished and out of that place by 11 o'clock. So your wages then, my wages then, were the large and only sum of 10 shillings. That's what my bonus was, and that was for working from 7 till 11. I got 10 shillings, which is the equivalent, I think, of 25 cents nowadays. And that was, I mean, just considering you did well, you know. You did. So he had some very interesting sales. I remember blue cabs. There was one blue cabs, and with a garage up in Rennes. It was one of the first ones involved in. And we had, you know, the big black Mercs now that are vintage. They were all big. They were all the big square black Mercs. That's what we were selling up in that place, you know. So we went from there. Then we did various house contents and on-site sales and so on and so forth. And we had the auctions, as I say, every week. And you had all the old dealers there: Bridie Byrne, Lizzie O'Brien. These were all the ones that would have been in the Ivy Market, which is gone now. And the one thing just strikes me now. This is one now that you definitely won't see nowadays. There was a fella called Fitzer. And Fitzer had a hand truck, and if you bought a wardrobe and you lived in Sutton or Stillorgan or wherever it was, he would put it on the truck and he would push it out, like your man in you know, the last of the summer wine, the television series. You know, the fella works for the old bat, and he has to push this thing. But it's exactly the same. This is what your
Just
man
for wardrobes.
and he'd have a couple of wardrobes or something pushed on the hand truck, and off he'd go. And then you had the likes of, in Dublin now, for instance, you had Joe Clark. Joe Clark was a book dealer. And Joe, he got amazing stuff. And he would set up on a Saturday morning. I can't remember. It was either O'Connell Bridge or the Halfpenny Bridge. And he would push his thing down there. And he'd have all the books. And whatever it was you wanted was a shilling. In the old money, you could buy all sorts of things from him. And he used to just set up on the side of the pavement, and off he'd go every Saturday morning. He'd be down there, but you don't have that sort of thing now. And you had certain families, like for instance, that would have come through. You had the Latimers, for instance, that would have been in Adams, and they would have worked in there, started as porters, and wound up did quite well for themselves out. afterwards. I suppose the modern equivalent of that would be sort of the handways, you know.
Yeah.
Sort of, and they you know, because they evolved out of Sheeran's auction rooms.
Yeah.
But when I started, now there were 25 auction rooms in Dublin. There would have been all along the North Quays, and a lot of these were old family businesses. They just simply died out. Or because they had big premises, the premises became worth more than the businesses. So they sold out. And the net result is effectively we are the last ones left doing what we do. And we had our live auctions here. I mean, this place has been here effectively 100 years now, and we've the live auctions up till 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't want to seem sort of very pretentious about it, but you know, we're good at what we do. And I was a good auctioneer when it came to being on the stand. I'm not so good with the technology, I must admit. I guess that's a generation thing. And we are very good at the house clearances. That's you know, and the one message I'd like to try to get through this thing today is, if you're in this situation that you have to clear a house, don't start throwing stuff out or giving it to charity without getting in touch with getting in touch with us here, because the amount of stuff that is chucked out is frightening. We know it from the other end, where people find things in skips and bring them into us, and so on and so forth. I can tell you just one small instance of when things got bad back in 2008, 2009, 2010. Somebody would a lot of people at that stage would have sort of got bicycles and gone out to searching skips looking for things that they could sell and so on and so forth. And this guy, his wife rang me and said, I think my husband had a bit of a find. I went up to the house. There was a suitcase there, the old brown newspaper. There were 4 or 5 pieces of Georgian silver in it, you might even remember it. And they got 5,500. Somebody had taken that out of an attic and had chucked it out of the attic without even opening it to see what was inside it, you know. And this goes on all the time. It's not just a Dublin thing, it goes on all over the country. And if as I've said to people before, if I was starting a political party, I'd call it the anti-skip party. to try to get the message through, just get in touch with somebody. And as I say, we are very good at this whole thing. And we have all the different sorts of auctions. Then we have the house contents, the weekly house contents with the big antique sales, the art sales, collectors auctions, and the on-site. One thing we do now, and we're very good at it, is we have these on-site online auctions. So where traditionally you'd have had the auction view on a Sunday and a Monday, and then the sale on a Tuesday and clearing it Wednesday and Thursday. You don't have to do that now, because they view it. It's all viewed online and the auction's online. So it means you don't have the public all trooping through your house and all this sort of thing. And you're actually doing better, because you're getting to a wider audience online.
Sure. Yeah. Just cutting back a bit. What was the first auction you did as an auctioneer?
The first auction I did as an auctioneer, believe it or not, was actually a property auction.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was a house in it was out in Sutton. It was actually a bungalow it was out near Sutton Cross. That was actually the first auction, because I had sold the contents of the place, and they asked me, this is when I'm going back to the old thing, and they asked me to sell the property, and we put the property in. So in actual fact, sorry, yeah, that was the very
first auction.
That was the very first auction I did as an auctioneer, as a property auctioneer, believe it or not.
Did it sell?
And it did. I think it was at the time. I think it was about 3,300 or something like that for a detached bungalow and something. Yeah. The first we used to have the on-site auctions, but this would all be for the company, for the want of a term. But the first auction, if you like to say, that I picked up off my own bat would have been in about 1963 or 64, and that was a house contents in Crinkin Lane in Shankill. And again, I did the contents out there and then sold the place afterwards. So and that was sort of the way it worked, you know. I mean, I've been involved in all shapes and makes. There was a huge one. It was a liquidation sale of a builder's suppliers. It was down near Island Bridge. Absolutely huge auction. I mean, you were selling sacks of nails and buckets of screws. You never seen anything like the stuff. There was
Crazy.
It was crazy, absolutely crazy stuff. And probably this is a totally weird one altogether. It's probably the one of the oddest auctions I had was it was a transport company that went wallop, right? But they were transporting chemical portaloos to somewhere in Africa. And the auction consisted of one lot, which was, I think, about 800 portaloos. Only unfortunately there was no chemicals to make them work.
Huh?
So that was sort of, you know, one of the odd. But you never know. Literally, you never know what you're going to come across, because it's behind closed doors. You don't know what, you just literally don't know what's behind closed doors. So you get all sorts of weird one. Another strange one we got was a life-size stuffed buffalo, and we collected that. That turned up quite near to us here in Rathmines, and it was on wheels. It was on a platform with wheels, so we caused a major sensation, because I got the bright idea for advertising. Now we'll put a rope on this, and we'll put it up through Rathmines at rush hour. That's what we did. We put it up through Rathmines, the pavement across the road here, and rush hour, and the traffic. You can imagine the expression on people's face when this thing was being hauled. This thing was huge full-size buffalo, massive thing it was.
Yeah,
I think it wound up in one of the pubs in town afterwards. I'm not too sure where it wound
never
up
made its
afterwards.
home. Just going back a little bit again.
Okay.
How did Herman Wilkinson come to be? How did it start out here?
Originally, I was involved in a company called Orchard Auctioneers, right? Orchard Auctioneers was an estate agency, but I was a furniture auctioneer, so I was always being pulled to the furniture. And we used to have auctions up in a place called Derwent House. It was a big red brick derelict house on the corner of Cranor Road, just across the road from where Stephen lived, actually. And it was the big house in there. And it had a huge big sit room and a huge big dining room in it. And we used to pack the stuff in there. Like, you'd have three-piece suites, one on top of the other. And then as the auction went on, you sat up on the top one there, auctioning everything around you. And that was sort of Orchard Auctioneers and Orchard Auctions, for want of a term. And we couldn't go on the way we were. We got as far as we could, if you like to say. Yeah. In fact, we had to leave that. We wound up working in a shed up on the Furhouse Road and storing the furniture over in what was Timon Lane, which has gone a long time ago. Yeah. It's now Orwell Estate in Templogue. This place came up for sale. This place used to be called McMullen Brothers. Now, it's nothing to do with any other Mullins or McMullins, etc., that are in this game now. It was called McMullen Brothers. It was run by two bachelor brothers, Fran and Louis, and they had an auction here once a week. And anyway, they decided to retire and to put the place up for sale. So basically, I wound up. I bought the place, and I needed somebody at the time to sort of run this down here. I had this vision pre Sherry Fitzgerald and all the rest of it. I had this vision of estate agents with auction rooms attached. And we had Rathfarnham going, so we had the auction rooms and the estate agency in Rathfarnham. And then we got this place here, which had the auction rooms. And McMullins had been here. So they'd been here about 50 years before we got it. And we have it 40-something. I know it's all between one thing and the other. It's you can say the bones of 100 years have been auctions going on here. So it must be one of the longest standing businesses in Rathmines, because the bank is closed. It would have been here a long time. It's gone. The chemists are gone. So it must be one of the longest standing businesses here.
Sure.
So we got this, and then next door, which was the Legion of Mary, came up for sale. So we had no option other than we had to buy that as well, you know.
Yeah.
So basically, we wound up with everything between the college and the swimming pool, you know.
Yeah.
So that's it. In fact, And then we expanded and we had Swan Hall, which personally I think was one of the best sale rooms around the place. I mean, as you remember,
Fabulous,
it was when the sun shone in that place. It was you know I called it Harrods of Rathmines. And it looked the part in there when it was all dressed up. So that was sort of how I wound up sort of here. And Ray Wilkinson, when we opened here in Rathmines, Ray came in at that stage. He came in to run Rathmines for us, if you understand me. And then sort of the orchard thing, we all went our separate ways. So we had the two companies then. We'd Herman White and Herman and Wilkinson. And White was Charlie White, who'd been working for me for I'm not sure how many years at that stage. So he came in to run the property end of things, and Ray and I then did the furniture between us. You know, that's sort of how that all evolved. You know.
So can you tell us the auction, David, that stands out the most for you in your mind?
Probably Wells House down in Gorey. That was a 3-day sale, and we had all these 98 pikes and all that sort of stuff. They were sort of all over the place. But the library down there was amazing. And this is back in the 60s, from my recollection is a bit vague. But when you went into the library, you opened the door, you closed the door, and there was no door. Why? Because the door was a bookcase. It was the whole bookcase. So the whole bookcase was on hinges. And you came in, and then you closed it. So the whole place was, from recollection, I think that was that. But that was amazing. There was some absolutely lovely stuff in that, and the place itself was just very interesting, very interesting.
Who was the agent? Like who you
that
were
was
with
that all of the country sales would have been Allen and Townsend.
Allen Townsend.
Because they would have been if you took that firm and you went back to the 30s and 40s, like they would have had huge auctions like Shelton Abbey. And all that sort of thing. So they specialised in that sort of thing. And that was, if you like to say, prior to the arrival of Sotheby's and Christie's and all that sort of thing. Because at that stage, you had Allen and Townsend, you had Hamilton's, you had Battersby's, and one or two others, and they did all that sort of stuff. And it was sort of before the rise of, if you like to say, the local fine art and furniture auctioneers, if you get me. So.
And at the time, then, were Allen and Townsend doing them large mansion house?
Yeah, they were doing they were doing that at the same time. We're doing the huge big auctions in Mansion House. We basically you'd have something between 3,000 and 4,500 lots. That would be every 6 weeks. They had a very different system from what we have, what's evolved here. But effectively, you started on a Monday morning at about 7 o'clock. And you had 1 day to get everything set up. So everything had to be set up, laid out, and all the rest of it. So all the furniture, the pictures, the jewellery, etc., etc. So that would all be taken in and laid out in the supper room in the Mansion House in 1 day. You'd view it then on the Tuesday. You'd sell Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you had 3 days to sell 4,500 lots. And John Boland, he was a great auctioneer, and I sat up there beside him as the clerk and picked it up from him, and he in turn picked it up from Hugh Townsend. And if you ask the old dealers, the real dealers, the likes of Paul Johnson, Jerry Kenyon, who only passed away very recently, they were all round when this was at its height. And they would all, and you'd say, who is the greatest auctioneer of the whole lot of them? And they'd all come back to say Hugh Townsend. He was just different. So Townsend trained Boland trained me. So that's the line. Whereas if you went at certain other firms, you'd have another line, and the style of auctioning would be totally different. You had to get through it quickly. That's why I can go as quickly as I can, because it simply had to be done right. So you auctioned Tuesday, you auctioned Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Everything had to be out of that place by 5 o'clock on Saturday evening. There was no question of, oh, my van broke down. Oh, I was drunk last night. They're going to hang over. I can't collect it. Everything had to be out of there by 5 o'clock, because if it wasn't, quite simply, the staff threw it out in the street. That was the end of it. And everything would be collected, whether it was sold, whether it was unsold, whatever it was, whoever it was, it all had to be out of there by 5 o'clock.
So one of them sale days, how would they work? Like, what time would you start?
You'd start at 10 o'clock in the morning.
And would you take a break?
Yeah, you had a break. You had a break at lunch, and you were always brought to the Bianconi. So you had the Hibernian Hotel, which was it was one deep place in Dublin, the Dawson Street, and we would go into the Bianconi, which was the grill under the Hibernian, and we'd be dined and wined in there for lunch, and then back you'd go, and you'd just keep going then until whatever the hell time it finished.
Yeah.
And that was the way it was. Like, for instance, on the delivery, on the setup day, you'd be in at say 7 in the morning, but you could be there till 2 o'clock the following morning, set the thing up. You just kept going. There was no question. That's why I very seldom ever have an 11s or 4 o'clocks, because it's just not, that wasn't the way it was. That's, you wouldn't even think of it, you know. You just kept going because the thing had to be done, you know.
And pace wise, then, like, selling at what, 150, 200 lots an hour?
He'd have to be doing something like that, because he'd have a minimum of 1,000 to 1,200 lots per day. Per day, that would be the minimum, and he'd just rattle through it, and he'd have the jug of water beside him, and slugging and nobody ever got a job, ever got a go. And one morning the word came through that the boss was unable to make it into work that day, and you're on, David. And that was when actually, now that I think of it, that could have been actually been before the auction of the place in Sutton. But I was on that day, and the word got around, and it was and you know, before the official word came through to me from the office to say that it was on, who the word was out and around town. Herman start. Who told me that I was on?
Dunno.
Tommy O'Reilly.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, Tommy O'Reilly. Because he and John Boland, the two of them, were like that. And Tommy said, Dave, you're on today, yeah. Like, what? I am, great, yeah.
So did you have someone then to clerk for you?
Yeah, I had somebody then to clerk for me then, yes. Oh, it would have been the girl in the office, Patricia. Patricia, she would have clerked for me. Patricia Bright, yeah. She married, I think, there was a show band, the Indian show band, and I think she married one of the musicians. She lives somewhere out. I think she lives out around Scary, Rush. She lives out in Rush, somewhere out that direction. Yeah. So yeah, no, that would have been it. That would have been it. But to say, Alan Townsend, though, you had a lot of these country sales, and you went round hither to thither, Bloomfield and Enniscorthy. We used to get quite a lot of them from Enniscorthy, Wexford, Wicklow, that area, you know.
So yeah, no, I think we're gonna hop ahead to the quick fire round.
Right, go on.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah,
you ready for this? Let's start with an easy one, okay?
Right, okay.
What's your favourite colour?
That green there.
Oh, perfect.
Mint green. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Minty green for
You make good use of it.
Yeah. Well, that's why my office is painted green. I wasn't going to have whatever it is.
It's very soothing. Yeah.
That's why the auction rooms is all done.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good.
If you had to pick 3 items to bring to a desert island, what would they be?
3 items to bring to a desert island. I've collected coins in a sort of half-hearted fashion for many, many years ago. And years ago, there was a shop called the Dublin Smelting Company, run by Harry O'Kelly and his son Kevin. And that was where all the aspiring and junior collectors, we all started down there. And in those days, you could buy a Victorian crown for 7 and 6pence. But if it wasn't in the best of condition, you'd buy it for 6 and 3pence. So anyway, I was in there one day, and there was a George III crown in there, and it wasn't in the best of nick, and I bought it for 6 and 3pence.
Very good.
So we move on, and we're getting married, Anne and I. And part of the marriage services, with gold and silver I thee wed. And I said, I know what I'm going to do. And I produced the 5 shilling piece that I bought for 6 and 3pence, and that was the silver with which I wed. So I think I would take that with me.
Yeah.
This is one you'd appreciate. We have a holiday home down in the west of Ireland. And when you get out of the car and you're beside the Atlantic and you get, I don't know what you call it, the scent of the fresh air of the west of the sea area. I'd bring a jam jar of that sea. I'd bring a jam jar of that sea air with me.
We're hope that the desert island is in the Atlantic.
But probably the other thing. Probably a pint of Guinness.
Very good.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Right. You can go back and live one day in any era of humankind, human history. Which era do you pick, or what year do you pick, and why?
My goodness gracious! That's
It's a probing one, yeah.
That's an odd one. To think about that one. I think probably was it the 11th hour of the 11th day, or when was it when they signed the peace treaty after the First World War?
Very good.
And this is the most peculiar reason for doing something like that. My grandfather was German. He left Germany in 1893. But to cut an extremely long story short, he was interned for 4 years in England, as a lot of the German and Italians were. And technically speaking, he should have been freed on that day. But in fact, they were all considered to be a security risk. So they were actually held for 5 years. And that date, I suppose, would be of some significance, I think. Yeah.
Very good.
And another date which I find very amusing was that I had a cousin did a genealogy thing, and we discovered that my grandfather, my German grandfather, and my English grandmother were married on the 4th of the 4th, 04. And we thought it was because of all the fours. Not at all. Before your time, in my time, when you got married, if you got married before the financial year ended the 5th of April, and if you got married before the 5th of April, you got all your tax back. So he, being German, had it within 24 hours. So he the full year of tax he got back for
very good.
For it.
What's the favourite part of your job?
It has to be going out to the houses.
Yeah.
It has to be going out to the houses and seeing what's there and meeting the people and going through. Goodness only knows what people have got out there. It has to be. I think it has to be. The clearances, which, as I've said before, we as a company are very are very good at, and I'm good at, and it's what this place revolves around. Yeah, no, it has to be that.
Yeah. So we spoke a bit about what you'd bring to your desert island, but what's your prized possession?
Your most prized possession you have.
If
your most prized,
I suppose I'll put it this way: if you wanted to go around and say where was my favourite place or something like that, it's I'm a gardener, and I like my back garden, but as time has evolved, we have a holiday place down in the west, down in Clare, and we love it down there. And to be honest with you, in a way, I'd like to have been born down there. You know, that's because it's great, it's lovely, it's great down there. It's great down there.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay?
Thanks a million. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thanks a million for coming.
Fantastic answers.
I hope I didn't bore you all to see it.
Far from it.
Okay, great.
So thanks very much for everyone for listening today. Very special thanks to people who've made the podcast happen. So in particular, the producer over there, Darren, from Total Vision Studios, who has came in and put this fabulous production on. You can find out more about us at Herman's Auctioneers on Instagram, Twitter, and also at herman.ie to see all about our auctions that we have going on all the time, ever evolving and changing.